In the nursery, painted celestial blue, decorated with stars and planets that glowed softly in the dark, Corbin watched his 11-month-old son lying motionless in the crib. Silence weighed like concrete on his shoulders. It wasn't natural. A baby should cry, scream, babble, make any sound indicating life. But Briar remained still, empty eyes fixed on the ceiling, his useless little legs beneath the dinosaur blanket his grandmother had lovingly knitted months before his birth. Rain tapped against the window in a gentle rhythm, as if trying to lull the child into a sleep he didn't need. Briar already slept too much, lost in a world no one could reach. The diagnosis still echoed in Corbin's mind like a perpetual sentence: paralysis of the lower limbs, extensive neurological damage, guarded prognosis. Clinical, cold words that failed to capture the devastation they caused. He gripped the crib railing until his knuckles turned white. "Did he eat?" Lena asked from the doorway, her voice barely a whisper. Corbin nodded without turning. He knew he would find the same look in his wife's eyes, that mixture of despair and resignation that had permanently settled on her once vibrant face. He heard her soft footsteps on the carpet, felt her presence beside him, the warmth of her body a reminder of what they used to be. The physical therapist called, rescheduled for Thursday. Corbin closed his eyes for a moment. Another postponement, another day lost. The urgency to do something, anything, burned inside him like an uncontrollable fever. "I'll make some tea," Lena said, her hand briefly resting on his shoulder before withdrawing. She didn't wait for a response. She didn't need to. Their days unfolded in a predictable routine of basic care, medical appointments, and prolonged silences. Their marriage, once filled with laughter and plans for the future, now reduced to taking turns feeding and medicating Briar, while avoiding looking into each other's eyes to keep from seeing their own pain reflected back. Lena had become a shell of herself. Once a music teacher, full of melodies and stories to tell, now she moved through the house like a ghost, fulfilling her obligations with mechanical precision, saving her tears for when she thought no one was watching. Sometimes Corbin found her sitting on the bathroom floor, silently sobbing into a towel. He no longer knew how to comfort her. In the crib, Briar blinked slowly, his golden eyelashes like the sun he rarely saw, contrasting with the paleness of his skin. He didn't smile. He had never smiled. It was as if he had been born knowing the world held no joy for him. Corbin leaned down and, with infinite care, touched his son's soft cheek. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, forcing an enthusiasm he didn't feel. "What do you say we change things up around here, huh?" Briar didn't respond, his blue eyes, identical to Lena's, seeming to look through his father, to a distant point no one else could see. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, beating against the window glass like impatient fingers. Corbin looked at the calendar hanging next to the changing table. 2 weeks until Briar's first birthday. A year of life that seemed more like a sentence than a celebration. Something needed to change. He couldn't simply watch his son wither like a plant without sunlight. He couldn't witness the woman he loved disappear a little more each day. He couldn't accept that this would be their story, a silent saga of loss and resignation. The answer came as a sudden, irrational, almost desperate flash. But Corbin clung to it like a castaway to a piece of wood in the open sea. Maybe it was madness. Maybe it was exactly what they needed. "We're going to find a light for you, son," he promised, his voice firm for the first time in months. "We're going to bring the brightness back to this house." The idea didn't leave him during the 3 days that followed. It grew like a stubborn seed taking root in his mind, sending shoots into every thought. While driving to work, while typing reports he couldn't focus enough to finish, while watching Lena move mechanically through the routine of feeding and cleaning Briar, the idea persisted, gaining strength. It was on a Tuesday morning, with the sun finally appearing after a week of rain, that Corbin decided to act. He called the office, informed them he would take the day off for family reasons, and waited until Lena left for her weekly therapy appointment, one of the few moments when she allowed herself to seek help. "I'll be back before lunch," he told the babysitter hired to stay with Briar during those 2 hours. Monica, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and experienced hands, nodded without asking questions. She had witnessed enough of their situation to understand that this family needed space to breathe. The animal shelter was 30 minutes away by car on the outskirts of town, a simple complex painted in faded yellow with a fenced yard where some dogs played under volunteer supervision. Corbin parked, took a deep breath and tried to organize his thoughts. What he was doing was impulsive, perhaps even irresponsible. How could they care for an animal when they could barely manage Briar's needs? But something inside him insisted this was the right direction. An inexplicable, almost stubborn conviction pushing him forward. Sandra, the shelter coordinator, greeted him with a warm smile. She was a robust woman with graying hair and a face marked by time and sun, wearing an apron with the institution's logo. "How can I help you?" she asked, leading him down the corridor where rows of kennels housed dogs of all sizes and ages. Corbin hesitated. How could he explain what he was looking for when he himself wasn't entirely sure? "I have a son," he began, feeling his throat tighten. "He has special needs. He's paralyzed from the waist down and doesn't interact much with the world." Sandra nodded, her green eyes softening with understanding. "I thought maybe a dog could—" He made a vague gesture with his hands, unable to articulate the absurd hope he was nurturing. "A therapy dog," Sandra concluded, placing a hand on his arm. "They can work wonders for children with special challenges. I've seen it happen many times." "Yes, something like that. But I can't afford a professionally trained dog, and my wife, she's not convinced it's a good idea." An understanding smile crossed Sandra's face. "Come with me. I think I have exactly what you need." She led him down a side corridor, away from the noise of the other dogs. At the end of the corridor was a small room with a comfortable dog bed in one corner and toys scattered across the floor. Lying quietly on the bed was a golden retriever puppy. He wasn't like the other shelter dogs, barking and jumping excitedly at the presence of visitors. This one remained calm, watching them enter with an intelligent attention that seemed almost human. His golden fur shone under the light coming through the window, creating the illusion of a halo around him. "This is our special boy," Sandra explained, kneeling to pet the puppy, who received the touch with quiet dignity. "He was rescued 3 weeks ago from a pretty tough situation. His mother was very sick when we found them, and he was the only puppy that survived." The dog rose slowly, stretching as if he had all the time in the world, and walked over to Corbin. There wasn't the typical excitement of a puppy. No clumsy jumps or excessive licking. Instead, he simply rested his muzzle against Corbin's leg and looked up, his deep brown eyes serene and thoughtful. Something inexplicable happened in that moment. An immediate connection, as if a gentle electric current ran through Corbin's body. It was as if the dog was saying, "I'm ready when you are." "He's different," Corbin murmured, crouching down to the animal's level. Sandra smiled. "All our veterinarians say the same thing. He has a calmness that's not common in puppies, especially Goldens, which tend to be energetic. It's like he was born wise." The puppy placed a paw on Corbin's hand, not in play, but as a deliberate gesture of contact. "What's his name?" Corbin asked, feeling a lump in his throat. "He doesn't have one yet. We were waiting for the right family to name him." Corbin knew with a certainty he hadn't felt in months that he had found what he was looking for. This wasn't just any dog. This was the dog his son needed, that his entire family needed. "How much does the adoption cost?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the puppy. Sandra paused, studying him. "We normally charge a fee to cover vaccines and future neutering, but in this case," she hesitated, as if making a decision. "Let's say this is a special case. If you promise to give him a good home and bring joy to your son, we consider that payment enough." Corbin felt hot tears forming in his eyes. He hadn't cried since the day the doctor had delivered Briar's final diagnosis. "Thank you," was all he could say. When he left the shelter an hour later, with the small golden retriever in the passenger seat, wrapped in a blue blanket with the shelter's logo, Corbin felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. It was as fragile as the first leaf in spring, but it was there, stubborn and alive. "Let's go home, friend," he said to the puppy, who watched him with those serene eyes. "Let's meet your new buddy." Lena's expression when Corbin walked through the front door carrying the puppy was exactly what he expected, a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and predominantly exhaustion. "What is that?" she asked, her hands frozen in the middle of folding clean clothes on the sofa. Corbin took a deep breath, holding the puppy against his chest as if it were a shield. "It's a present for Briar." Lena dropped the small t-shirt she was holding, her face hardening. "A dog? You brought a dog home without consulting me?" Her voice was controlled, but Corbin knew that tone, the contained anger that had replaced her emotional outbursts from before. "I know it seems crazy, but Crazy, she interrupted, running her hands through her disheveled hair. Corbin, we can barely take care of our son. I can barely get out of bed some days. How do you expect us to care for an animal? The puppy remained surprisingly quiet in Corbin's arms, watching the scene with calm attention, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. This isn't just any dog, Lena, Corbin explained, cautiously advancing across the room. Sandra, the shelter coordinator, said he has a special temperament. Calm, intuitive. Dogs like him are used in therapy for children with special needs. We can't afford a therapy dog, Lena retorted, crossing her arms defensively. He's not professionally trained, not yet, but he has the natural instinct. You need to see him, Lena. He's different. As if to demonstrate the point, the puppy turned his head toward the hallway leading to Briar's room, his ears alert, as if he already knew there was someone there who needed him. Lena followed his gaze, and for a brief moment Corbin saw a spark of something in her eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or the slightest hint of hope. Is Monica with him? She asked, referring to the babysitter. Corbin nodded. Let's just try? Please. If it doesn't work, I'll take him back myself. Lena hesitated, her eyes going from her husband to the golden puppy. Finally, she sighed. This is crazy, she murmured, but her tone had softened. They walked together down the hallway, Corbin still carrying the puppy, who was now completely alert, as if sensing that something important was about to happen. They stopped at the door to Briar's room, where Monica was sitting in the rocking chair, reading a children's book aloud to the motionless boy in the crib. She interrupted her reading when she saw them, her eyes widening slightly at the sight of the puppy. I can come back later, she offered, starting to rise. No, stay, said Lena, her voice barely audible. Please. Monica nodded, instinctively understanding that her presence might be needed, whether as a witness or as support. Corbin approached the crib, feeling the puppy's body tense slightly in his arms. Carefully, he lowered him so that he could see Briar, but still keeping him secure. Briar, look who came to meet you, he said, with a forced animation that sounded false even to his own ears. What happened next made time freeze in the room. Briar, who rarely focused his gaze on any person or object for more than a few seconds, turned his head toward the golden puppy, his eyes, normally vague and distant, fixed on the animal with an intensity they had never shown before. The puppy, in turn, tilted his head to the side, his ears alert, staring back at Briar with equal fascination. And then, like a star exploding in the dark universe, Briar smiled. It wasn't just a muscular reflex. It was a genuine smile, full and bright, that lit up his pale little face and brought life to his blue eyes. His lips curved upward, his cheeks rose, and a small sound, something between a sigh and a laugh, escaped from his throat. Lena gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Monica let the book fall to the floor. Corbin felt his legs weaken. My God, whispered Lena, her eyes watering. He's smiling. It was the first time in almost a year of life, that Briar had shown any clear emotional reaction. The first smile, the first sound of joy. Carefully, almost reverently, Corbin lowered the puppy into the crib. The golden moved with surprising gentleness for such a young animal, approaching Briar without jumping or making sudden movements. Carefully, as if understanding the fragility of the situation, he touched his nose to Briar's cheek. The boy laughed. A crystalline, pure sound that filled the room like long-forgotten music. His little hands rose tremulously, trying to reach the puppy's golden fur. Lena fell to her knees beside the crib, tears freely streaming down her face. How? She began, unable to complete the question. Her voice choked with emotion. Corbin knelt beside her, equally overwhelmed. I don't know, he answered honestly. I just felt that he needed this. The puppy, as if comprehending the magnitude of the moment, lay down gently beside Briar, placing a paw on the boy's chest in an almost protective posture. Briar continued smiling, his eyes now alive and bright, fixed on his new friend, his fingers tentatively touching the soft fur. Monica, discreet as always, wiped her own eyes and quietly headed for the door. I'll leave you alone, she whispered, but Lena and Corbin barely noticed her departure. They were hypnotized by the scene before them, the son who had never shown emotion now overflowing with joy in the presence of this four-legged being. After several minutes, Lena finally raised her eyes to Corbin, her face transformed. The defensive and exhausted woman from moments before had disappeared, replaced by someone who seemed to have awakened from a long sleep. What are we going to call him? She asked, her voice soft but firm. Corbin looked at his wife with surprise. He hadn't expected this question. At best, he had expected reluctant permission to temporarily keep the puppy. "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't think that far ahead." Lena watched the golden puppy, whose fur gleamed under the soft light coming through the window, creating a luminous halo around him. The animal continued to lie next to Briar, patient and vigilant, like a small guardian. "Lumen," she said finally, her voice little more than a whisper. "Lumen," Corbin repeated, intrigued. Lena nodded, a fragile smile forming on her lips for the first time in months. "It means light in Latin," she explained, "because he brought light back to our son's eyes." Corbin felt a lump in his throat. The name was perfect, like the animal that seemed to have been sent to illuminate the darkness that had dominated their lives. "Lumen," he agreed, extending his hand to caress the puppy's soft fur, who raised his intelligent eyes to him. "Welcome to the family." In that room, painted celestial blue, something extraordinary had happened. A connection had been formed, a bond that defied explanation, but that shone with the promise of transformation. As they watched Briar interact with Lumen, Lena and Corbin felt for the first time in a long time that perhaps, just perhaps, the days of darkness were finally coming to an end. The days that followed brought a subtle but undeniable transformation to the Winters' home. It was as if a window had been opened in a house closed for too long, allowing a fresh breeze to circulate through previously stagnant rooms. The center of this change was the extraordinary relationship blossoming between Briar and Lumen. The golden retriever proved more special with each passing day. Unlike most puppies of his breed, he wasn't destructive or excessively agitated. He seemed to instinctively understand Briar's limitations and adapted his behavior accordingly. When he was in the crib with the boy, he moved with deliberate care, as if he knew exactly how much contact Briar could tolerate. During the night, he slept on the rug beside the crib, raising his head at the slightest sound of discomfort from the child. On a particularly sunny morning, 2 weeks after Lumen's arrival, Lena found Corbin standing in the doorway of Briar's room, observing a scene that until recently would have seemed impossible. Briar was lying on the soft rug, placed there by Corbin for a session of exercises prescribed by the physical therapist. But instead of crying or remaining passive as usual, the boy was actively trying to move. His thin arms pushed against the floor, his face concentrated in a visible effort as he tried to drag himself a few inches forward, toward Lumen, who was lying a short distance away, watching with those intelligent eyes as if offering silent encouragement. "He's trying to go to Lumen," Corbin whispered, feeling Lena approach behind him. "On his own." Lena covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes watering. It's amazing." It was more than amazing. It was revolutionary. Briar had never shown any motivation to move voluntarily. Physical therapy exercises had always been a battle of tears and resistance. When Briar finally managed to drag himself a few inches forward, Lumen approached, touching his nose to the boy's cheek as a reward. Briar laughed, that crystalline sound that was becoming more frequent each day, and tried to reach for his friend's golden fur. "Dr. Marshall needs to see this," Lena murmured, referring to the pediatric neurologist who was following Briar's case. "He won't believe it." And indeed, at the next appointment, the doctor couldn't hide his surprise at the reports and videos that Corbin and Lena presented. "This is remarkable," admitted Dr. Marshall, a middle-aged man with graying hair and thin-framed glasses, as he watched a video of Briar trying to reach Lumen. "I've never seen such a pronounced response in such a short time, especially with Briar's neurological profile." "What does it mean?" Lena asked anxiously, holding Corbin's hand tightly. "Is there any chance of greater recovery than you predicted?" The doctor adjusted his glasses, choosing his words carefully. "The brain, especially that of such a young child, has extraordinary plasticity. Damaged areas can sometimes be compensated for by other regions that take on new functions. What we're seeing with Briar appears to be a significant increase in motivation, which is stimulating brain areas that were previously dormant." He paused, looking at the couple seriously. "I don't want to create false hopes. Briar's paraplegia is still a reality, and the neurological damage he suffered is extensive, but this dog seems to have found a way to connect with Briar that none of us could. And that connection is producing results that, frankly, go beyond our initial expectations." On the way back home, Lena remained silent, looking out the car window as the urban landscape quickly passed by. Corbin respected her silence, understanding that she was processing everything they had heard. "I was afraid," she said finally, her voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. "Afraid to get attached to him, to Briar." Lena turned to look at Corbin, her eyes moist. "Since he was born, since we knew about the diagnosis, I kept a distance. I loved him, cared for him, but I was always preparing myself to lose him, as if somehow, by not allowing myself to feel complete joy with him, I could protect myself from pain." Corbin swallowed hard, recognizing the truth in her words. It was something they felt, but had never articulated. "And now?" he asked softly. Lena looked out the window again, at the sky that was beginning to tinge with the colors of dusk. "Now Lumen has arrived and scrambled everything. He loves Briar without reservations, without fear, and somehow that's teaching me to do the same." When they arrived home, the babysitter, Monica, greeted them at the door with a smile. "You need to see this," she said quietly, motioning for them to follow her. In the living room, on a blanket spread on the floor, Briar was sitting, not lying down but sitting with the support of some pillows. Lumen was lying beside him, patient as always. In front of Briar were several colored blocks, and to Lena and Corbin's absolute amazement, the boy was trying to stack them, his little hands moving with more coordination than they had ever shown. "He wanted to sit up," explained Monica, her own face lit up with enthusiasm. "He got restless in the crib, so I put him on the floor with Lumen, and he started pushing himself, trying to get more upright. I helped with the pillows, and look." Lena fell to her knees beside her son, tears freely flowing down her face. Briar looked at her, and another miracle smiled, extending a red block in her direction. "Mama," he babbled. It wasn't a clear word. Maybe it wasn't even really mommy that he was trying to say. But it was the first attempt at verbal communication he had ever made. Lena took the block with trembling hands, unable to speak through the tears. Corbin knelt beside her, equally moved. "This is," he began, but couldn't finish. There were no adequate words to describe what they were witnessing. Lumen, as if understanding the magnitude of the moment, approached and laid his head in Briar's lap, who laughed and sank his fingers into the animal's soft fur. Later, after Briar was put to bed, with Lumen faithfully lying beside the crib, Lena and Corbin sat on the back porch, sharing a bottle of wine that had remained unopened for months. "You know what surprises me most?" Lena asked, watching the stars that were beginning to dot the night sky. "What?" "How Lumen seems to know exactly what Briar needs. It's not just the companionship, it's as if he had a plan. As if he were deliberately encouraging Briar to try new things." Corbin nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It was something he too had noticed. The way Lumen would position himself just out of Briar's reach, prompting the boy to stretch or move to touch him. The way he would gently nudge toys toward Briar, almost like a teacher offering learning tools to a student. "He's like a little golden angel," Lena whispered, a smile playing on her lips. "A very practical angel," Corbin added. "One that drools and occasionally eats shoes." Lena's laugh, a genuine, full laugh, filled the night air, and Corbin realized it was the first time he'd heard that sound in almost a year. Another small miracle from Lumen. As spring gave way to summer, the changes in the Winters household became increasingly evident. The house that once felt like a mausoleum, quiet, sterile, filled with unspoken grief, was slowly coming back to life. Plants appeared on windowsills, curtains were drawn back to let in more light, and most significantly, laughter, Briar's crystalline giggles and Lena's warm chuckles, echoed through the rooms with increasing frequency. Lumen continued to be an extraordinary presence. At 4 months old, he still maintained that unusual calmness, that almost supernatural awareness of Briar's needs. But he had also begun to show more playful traits typical of his breed, fetching balls in the backyard, splashing in puddles when they took him for walks, or playfully stealing socks from the laundry basket. Briar's progress, while slow, was steady. With Lumen as motivation, his physical therapy sessions had transformed from dreaded ordeals into opportunities for achievement. He was now sitting upright with minimal support, using his arms with increasing coordination, and making deliberate sounds that were beginning to resemble words. His attention span had improved dramatically. He could now focus on books, toys, and especially Lumen for extended periods. It was a miracle unfolding in slow motion. On a particularly hot July afternoon, as Briar napped in the living room, on a mat on the floor now rather than isolated in his crib, with Lumen faithfully curled beside him, Dr. Marshall made a house call. The neurologist had become increasingly intrigued by Briar's case, requesting permission to document the boy's progress for a medical journal. "The improvements are undeniable," he said, reviewing the charts where Lena and Corbin had been meticulously tracking Briar's developments. His cognitive engagement, motor skills in the upper body, attempts at vocalization, all showing significant improvement curves. But his legs, Lena asked, the question that always hovered at the edge of every conversation. Dr. Marshall removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "The damage to the spinal cord remains extensive," he said carefully. "I don't want to create false expectations. Walking unassisted well, it remains highly unlikely." Corbin felt Lena tense beside him, her hand gripping his a little tighter. "But," the doctor continued, replacing his glasses, "I've been in this field long enough to know that sometimes, especially with young children, we witness exceptions to the rules. The brain's ability to rewire itself, to find alternative pathways. It can be truly remarkable." He looked at the sleeping boy, then at the dog who had raised his head alertly, as if following their conversation. Whatever that dog is doing, it's working. The emotional connection has triggered neurological responses we couldn't achieve with traditional therapy alone. I've started recommending similar interventions for some of my other patients. After the doctor left, Corbin found Lena sitting beside Briar and Lumen, gently stroking the dog's head. "What are you thinking?" he asked, sinking down on the floor beside her. Lena was quiet for a moment, her eyes fixed on their sleeping son. "I'm thinking about what Dr. Marshall said, about exceptions to the rules." Corbin nodded, understanding the dangerous territory of hope they were entering. "I know we shouldn't expect miracles," she continued, her voice soft but steady. "But then I think about how just a few months ago we would have said it was impossible for Briar to laugh, to interact, to try to speak. And here we are." She looked at Corbin, her eyes clear and determined in a way he hadn't seen since before Briar's birth. "I think we need to stop limiting what we believe is possible." That evening, after Briar was settled for the night, they sat at the kitchen table with notebooks and laptops, researching innovative physical therapy techniques, adaptive equipment, and experimental treatments. For the first time since the diagnosis, they weren't just accepting the hand they'd been dealt, they were actively seeking ways to change the game. "I'm thinking about going back to teaching," Lena said suddenly, looking up from her laptop. "Just part-time at first. We could use the money for some of these therapies, and Monica has been amazing with Briar." Corbin couldn't hide his surprise. Lena had been adamant about not returning to work, insisting that Briar needed her constant presence. "Are you sure? I thought you wanted to be with him all the time." Lena smiled, a new confidence in her expression. "I'll always be his mother, whether I'm sitting beside him every second or not. And honestly, I think it might be good for both of us, for him to have different people in his life, and for me to remember that I'm more than just a caregiver." Her eyes drifted to the living room, where Lumen had taken up his night position on the rug beside Briar's portable bed. "Besides, he has his golden guardian now, and that dog has done more for him in 3 months than I managed in 9. "Hey," Corbin reached across the table, taking her hand. "You've been exactly what Briar needed. You kept him alive, kept him loved, even when it seemed impossible." Lena's eyes glistened in the soft kitchen light. "We all did," she corrected gently. "And now we're going to do more. We're going to stop surviving and start living again." As if on cue, a soft woof came from the living room, Lumen's gentle alert that Briar was stirring. Lena and Corbin smiled at each other, a silent acknowledgement of their new reality, and rose together to check on their son. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges they couldn't yet foresee. But for the first time since that terrible day in the doctor's office, when they'd received Briar's diagnosis, they were walking that path together, illuminated by the stubborn, golden light of hope. The heat of summer gave way to the crisp air of autumn, bringing with it a season of unexpected breakthroughs. Lena had returned to teaching music at the elementary school 3 days a week, her passion for melody and harmony reignited. The extra income allowed them to invest in specialized therapy equipment for Briar, transforming the spare bedroom into a mini rehabilitation center. Monica continued to care for Briar during Lena's working hours, her genuine affection for the boy, and respect for Lumen's special role making her an invaluable part of their support system. Briar, now 17 months old, was flourishing in ways that continued to astonish everyone who knew his history. His vocabulary, while still limited, grew weekly. Mama and Dada had been joined by Lou for Lumen, Mo for Monica, and various approximations of words like ball, book, and more. His upper body strength had improved dramatically, allowing him to pull himself into a sitting position without support and to use his arms to propel himself short distances across the floor. Lumen, growing into his adult size but still maintaining that extraordinary calm intelligence, remained the constant catalyst for Briar's progress. The bond between them had only deepened, evolving into a partnership that sometimes seemed almost supernatural in its synchronicity. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, when the moment they would later look back on as the turning point occurred. Corbin had come home early from work, finding Monica in the kitchen preparing Briar's dinner. "They're in the living room," she said with a smile that hinted at something special. "You might want to see this." Corbin hung his coat on the rack and made his way to the living room, stopping in the doorway at the sight that greeted him. Briar was on the floor as usual, surrounded by his favorite toys. Lumen lay a few feet away, watching attentively. What wasn't usual was the determined look on Briar's face as he gripped the edge of the coffee table, his knuckles white with effort. "What's he trying to do?" Corbin whispered to Monica, who had come to stand beside him. "Just watch," she replied softly. "He's been at it for almost 10 minutes now." As they stood there, Briar pulled himself closer to the table, then, in a movement that made Corbin's heart nearly stop, pushed himself up. His legs trembled violently, clearly unused to bearing weight, but for a brief, miraculous moment, Briar was standing, supported only by his grip on the coffee table. "Oh my God," Corbin breathed, unable to move, afraid that any disruption might break the spell of the moment. Lumen rose to his feet, tail wagging gently, positioning himself close to Briar's side without touching him, a safety net ready to catch the boy if he fell. Briar's face was a study in concentration, his small features tight with effort. Then, as they watched in awe, he let go of the table with one hand, reaching toward Lumen. The movement unbalanced him. He began to tip sideways, a flash of fear crossing his face. But before Corbin could lunge forward, Lumen was there, moving with uncanny precision to brace himself against Briar's falling body. Instead of hitting the floor, Briar found himself leaning against the golden retriever, his small hand clutching Lumen's fur. The dog stood perfectly still, becoming a living support beam, allowing Briar to regain his balance. And then something even more extraordinary happened. With Lumen as his crutch, Briar took a step. It was tentative, wobbly, more of a drag than a proper step, but it was intentional movement. His paralyzed leg didn't lift properly, but with tremendous effort, he managed to slide it forward a few inches. Corbin couldn't breathe. He reached blindly for his phone, fingers trembling as he hit record, knowing Lena would never forgive him if he didn't capture this moment. "That's it, buddy," he whispered, tears blurring his vision. "You're doing it." Briar looked up at the sound of his father's voice, his face lighting up with recognition. His concentration broke for a moment, and he started to wobble again, but Lumen adjusted his position smoothly, maintaining the support. "Dada," Briar said clearly. His eyes locked on Corbin, a smile of pure pride transforming his little face. "I'm here, buddy," Corbin replied, dropping to one knee to be at eye level with his son. "You're amazing." "You're doing so amazing." Briar took another step toward his father, Lumen moving in perfect tandem, providing just enough support without taking over. It was a dance between boy and dog, practiced and precise, as if they'd been rehearsing for this moment for months. Perhaps they had in private moments when no one was watching. When Briar reached Corbin, his legs finally gave out. Corbin caught him, lifting him into a tight embrace, unable to hold back the tears any longer. "You walked," he whispered into his son's soft hair. "You walked." Monica stood in the doorway, her own eyes wet with tears. "He's been trying all week," she said softly. Lumen seemed to know what he wanted to do, kept positioning himself just right. Corbin looked down at the golden retriever, who sat calmly beside them, tail sweeping the floor in gentle, satisfied motions. "I need to call Lena," Corbin said, still clutching Briar to his chest. "And Dr. Marshall." "I already texted your wife," Monica said with a smile. "She's on her way home." 20 minutes later, when Lena burst through the front door, her cheeks flushed and her eyes wild with a mixture of hope and disbelief, Corbin had composed himself enough to set up the scene again. "We don't know if he can do it twice," he warned her, setting Briar down next to the coffee table. Don't be disappointed if... But he needn't have worried. The moment Briar was placed near the table, he reached for it with the same determined expression. Lumen immediately positioned himself at the perfect distance, ready for his role. Lena pressed her hands to her mouth, watching in silent wonder as her son pushed himself up again, legs trembling but holding. When he reached for Lumen and took that first staggering step, she made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "That's it, my brave boy," she encouraged, kneeling down and opening her arms. "Come to Mama." Briar's face lit up at the sight of her, and with Lumen as his steadfast support, he took 3 more shuffling steps before falling into her waiting arms. Lena gathered him close, rocking back and forth, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she kept repeating. "You did it." "Lou, help," Briar said clearly, patting Lumen's head as the dog settled beside them. Lena looked up at Corbin, her face transformed by a joy that seemed to radiate from within. "We need to call Dr. Marshall. He needs to see this." Dr. Marshall arrived the following morning, his usual professional demeanor visibly shaken as he witnessed Briar's new ability. He conducted a thorough examination, paying special attention to the responses in Briar's legs, his expression growing increasingly thoughtful. "I've never seen anything quite like this," he admitted when they gathered in the kitchen afterward, Briar happily playing with Lumen in the living room under Monica's supervision. By all medical understanding, the damage to his spinal cord should prevent this kind of voluntary movement. "But we all saw it," Lena insisted, her voice steady. "He's moving. He's walking with Lumen's help." The doctor nodded slowly. "Yes, he is. And that's what's so extraordinary. It appears that through his intense motivation to reach the dog, Briar has established new neural pathways, alternative routes around the damaged sections of his spinal cord." He leaned forward, his eyes intent. "It's rare, but not unheard of. The medical literature has documented cases where intense emotional connection creates neurological responses that bypass conventional limitations." "So what does this mean for his future?" Corbin asked, hardly daring to hope. "Doctor..." Marshall removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully before responding. "I won't make promises I can't keep. He may never walk independently. The movement we're seeing is partial, requires tremendous effort, and depends heavily on the dog's support." He replaced his glasses, his expression softening. "But what I can say is that 6 months ago, I would have told you that any walking was impossible. Now I believe we need to reconsider what's possible for Briar." He looked toward the living room, where Briar's laugh could be heard as Lumen gently nuzzled his neck. "That dog," he said quietly, "has accomplished what millions of dollars of medical technology couldn't. He's found a way to connect with Briar on a level that has literally rewired his brain. I'd like your permission to document this case more thoroughly. It could help other children with similar conditions." As the doctor left, promising to arrange for additional specialized physical therapy to build on Briar's breakthrough, Lena and Corbin stood in the doorway, watching their son. Briar was sitting on the floor, arms wrapped around Lumen's neck, whispering something in the dog's ear. The golden retriever sat perfectly still, as if listening with the deepest attention to whatever secrets the boy was sharing. "We should be documenting everything," Lena said suddenly. "Every interaction, every new movement. Not just for Dr. Marshall's research, but for ourselves, to remember how far he's come." Corbin nodded, sliding an arm around her waist, and how far he might still go. That night after Briar was asleep, now in a proper toddler bed rather than a crib, with Lumen as always settled on the floor beside him, Lena sat at the kitchen table, a blank journal open before her. On the cover she had written simply, "Briar and Lumen, a journey of light." She began to write, documenting not just the medical milestones, but the small, precious moments that marked their journey. The first time Briar had laughed. The way Lumen seemed to know when Briar was about to have a seizure before it happened. The quiet hours when the dog would lie patiently while Briar practiced his words, repeating them back to the attentive golden ears. It was more than a medical record. It was the story of a miracle, not a sudden dramatic one, but a miracle that unfolded day by day, step by wobbly step, illuminated by the unwavering presence of a golden light that had entered their lives when they needed it most. Winter came, bringing with it holidays that felt genuinely celebratory for the first time since Briar's birth. The winter's home, once stark and clinical in its joylessness, now glowed with string lights, aromatic pine boughs, and the warmth of renewed hope. Briar had turned 2 in October, marking the occasion with a small but joyful party attended by Dr. Marshall, Monica, a few neighbors who had become part of their support network, and Sandra from the animal shelter, who wept openly when she saw Briar take several halting steps with Lumen's assistance. "I knew he was special," she had whispered, watching the golden retriever guide the boy across the living room floor. "But I had no idea just how special." As December's snow piled outside the windows, Briar's progress continued at a pace that amazed everyone involved in his care. The specialized physical therapist who visited 3 times weekly reported that she had never seen a child with his level of injury show such dramatic improvement. Briar could now stand independently for nearly 30 seconds, could take up to 10 steps with Lumen's support, and had begun using a specially designed walker when the dog needed a break. His cognitive development had likewise accelerated. His vocabulary now included dozens of words, he could identify colors and shapes, and he showed an unexpected aptitude for music, perhaps inherited from Lena, often humming along with surprising accuracy when she played the piano. But the most remarkable progress was evident in the intricate dance that had developed between boy and dog. Lumen had grown into his full adult size, a magnificent golden retriever with deep, intelligent eyes and that same unusual calm that had marked him as a puppy. He seemed to instinctively understand exactly how much support Briar needed at any given moment, when to press close against his side for balance, when to move slightly away to encourage independent effort, when to gently nudge a foot that wasn't moving properly. It was a December evening, with snow falling softly outside the windows and the house filled with the scent of the pine tree Corbin had brought home, when Lena captured a moment on video that would later become something of a legend among Briar's medical team. Briar was in the living room, practicing with his walker while Christmas music played softly in the background. Lumen lay nearby, seemingly resting, but watching attentively as always. The boy had made several circuits of the room, his face set in the look of intense concentration that accompanied his walking efforts. Then, apparently tiring of the walker, Briar pushed it aside. Instead of sitting down as he usually did when fatigued, he stood for a moment, swaying slightly. Lumen immediately rose to his feet, alert, but not rushing forward. Briar looked at the dog, then held out his hands. "Dance, Lou," he said clearly. Lumen approached with gentle precision, positioning himself alongside Briar, pressing his sturdy body against the boy's legs. Briar wrapped one arm around the dog's neck, the other resting on his back. And then, as Bing Crosby's White Christmas played softly in the background, boy and dog began to move together in a slow, shuffling circle. It wasn't just walking, it was dancing. Briar's movements were still labored, his legs still stiff, but there was a fluidity, a joy in the motion that transcended the medical miracle of it. His face was alight with pure happiness, his eyes locked with Lumen's as they moved in their careful circle. Lena filmed silently, tears streaming down her face until Corbin came in from the kitchen and stopped, transfixed by the scene. "Are you seeing this?" she whispered, not taking her eyes from the dancing pair. "I see it," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not sure I believe it, but I see it." When the song ended, Briar was exhausted but triumphant. He collapsed onto the couch, giggling as Lumen jumped up beside him, the only piece of furniture the dog was allowed on, and settled his head in the boy's lap. "Again tomorrow," Briar declared, patting Lumen's head with a finality that made both parents laugh through their tears. The video of their dance became something of a sensation among Briar's medical team. Dr. Marshall shared it, with permission, at a neurological conference, where it prompted discussion about the untapped potential of animal therapy for severe neurological conditions. 3 different medical journals requested permission to reference the case, and a research hospital in Boston reached out about including Briar in a study on neural plasticity in developing brains. But fame was never the point. For the Winters family, the true miracle was in the everyday moments. Briar calling out for Lumen first thing each morning, the way the boy's face lit up when the dog brought him a toy, the quiet hours when they would lie together on the floor, Briar reading picture books aloud in his developing speech, Lumen listening with that uncanny attention. One snowy afternoon, as Lena worked on lesson plans at the kitchen table while monitoring Briar and Lumen in the living room, she noticed something that made her put down her pen and watch more closely. Briar was sitting on the floor, playing with a set of wooden blocks. Lumen was nearby, as always, but something in his posture had changed. He seemed more alert, his eyes fixed on Briar with unusual intensity. Then, without warning, he rose and moved to the boy's side, pressing against him firmly. 30 seconds later, Briar's body stiffened, his eyes rolled back, and he began to seize. Lena was already moving, having recognized Lumen's early warning. She reached Briar just as the seizure began, easing him onto his side as they'd been taught, making sure his airway remained clear. Lumen stayed pressed against Briar's back, a steady, calming presence as the boy's body convulsed. The seizure lasted less than a minute, mild compared to some he'd experienced in the past. As Briar's body relaxed and his eyes fluttered open, disoriented and tired, Lumen gently licked his cheek once, then settled down, allowing the boy to use him as a pillow while he recovered. Lena stroked her son's hair, marveling yet again at the dog's impossible abilities. "How did you know, Lumen?" she whispered. "How do you always know?" The golden retriever merely looked at her with those wise brown eyes, as if to say that some things didn't need explanation, they simply were. Later that evening, after Briar was asleep, Lena found Corbin in their small home office, working on the website he had recently launched, Luminous Connections, dedicated to connecting families of children with disabilities with therapy animals. "Lumen predicted another seizure today," she said, sitting on the edge of the desk. "Gave me enough warning to be right there when it started." Corbin nodded, not surprised anymore by these demonstrations of the dog's extraordinary awareness. "Sometimes I wonder," he said, leaning back in his chair, "if we were just incredibly lucky, or if there's something more to it. If he was somehow meant for Briar." Lena smiled, reaching out to adjust a framed photo on the desk, a picture of Briar and Lumen on the boy's second birthday, both looking directly at the camera with identical expressions of dignified joy. "Does it matter?" she asked softly. "Whether it was luck or fate or divine intervention?" Corbin considered this, then shook his head. "I guess not. The result is the same. The result was their son, growing stronger every day. Their family, rebuilt from the ashes of despair. Their home filled once again with light and hope and possibility. And at the center of it all, a golden dog with wise eyes and a seemingly impossible understanding of exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it." Spring came again, bringing with it cherry blossoms, gentle rains, and the second anniversary of Lumen's arrival in their lives. Briar, now 2.5, had become a bright, talkative child with a smile that could illuminate the darkest room. While his legs remained weaker than those of other children his age, requiring the continued use of his walker for longer distances, he could now stand independently for several minutes and walk short distances, with only Lumen's subtle guidance. His cognitive development had continued to flourish, revealing a sharp intelligence and an empathy that seemed beyond his years. Perhaps most remarkably, he had developed none of the emotional or behavioral issues that often accompanied severe physical disabilities in young children. Dr. Marshall attributed this largely to the consistent, unconditional support provided by Lumen, who remained the boy's constant companion, guardian, and friend. The golden retriever had become something of a local legend in their small community. People would stop on the street to watch him guide Briar through the park, moving with that precise, gentle coordination that allowed the boy a freedom of movement once thought impossible. Children would ask to pet him, and Lumen would submit to their attention with patient dignity, always keeping one eye on Briar, always ready to return to his side at the slightest indication of need. On a perfect May afternoon, the Winters family gathered in their backyard for a small celebration. A banner reading 2 years of light hung from the porch railing, and a specially baked dog-friendly cake sat on the picnic table alongside a more traditional one for the human guests. The guest list was small but significant. Dr. Marshall and his wife, Monica, who had become more family than employee, Sandra from the shelter, who brought her newest rescue puppy, a couple of neighbors who had been particularly supportive, and a family they had met through Corbin's Luminous Connections website, parents of a little girl with cerebral palsy who had recently been paired with a therapy dog of her own. As Corbin fired up the grill and Lena arranged platters of food, Briar and Lumen held court in the center of the yard. The boy sat on a blanket, the dog at his side, both of them accepting attention with the same calm grace. Briar answered questions about his dog with the seriousness of a professor discussing a complex theory, occasionally reaching out to stroke Lumen's golden coat as if drawing strength from the contact. He says Lumen talks to him, Lena explained to Dr. Marshall's wife, who had asked about the whispered conversations often observed between boy and dog, not in words, but in feelings. He says Lumen tells him when it's safe to try something new. And do you believe him? The woman asked, not dismissively, but with genuine curiosity. Lena watched as Briar whispered something in Lumen's ear, then, with a determined expression, pushed himself up to standing without using his hands, a new achievement they hadn't seen before. I believe there are connections we don't fully understand, she replied softly, and I believe that whatever is happening between them has given my son back to me in ways I never thought possible. As the afternoon progressed, Sandra approached Lena with tears in her eyes. When you and Corbin first started your website, she said, I thought maybe you'd help a few families in similar situations, but I just got the latest report. You've helped place over 50 therapy animals with children who need them in the past year alone. Lena smiled, watching as Corbin lifted Briar onto his shoulders, Lumen trotting faithfully alongside them as they made their way around the yard. It was Corbin's idea, she said. He couldn't bear the thought that there might be other families out there, suffering the way we were, who might be helped by what we discovered with Lumen. Sandra shook her head in wonder. It's amazing how one small decision, me putting that particular puppy in that particular room on that particular day, could create such ripples. That's the thing about light, Lena replied. It spreads. As the celebration continued, Dr. Marshall pulled Corbin aside, his expression serious but optimistic. I've been speaking with colleagues at the research hospital in Boston, he said. They're extremely interested in expanding their study based on Briar's case. They're looking at developing a formal training program for therapy dogs, specifically for children with neurological injuries, similar to Briar's. Corbin watched as Briar, now back on the ground, took several careful steps toward Monica, who was offering him a juice box. Lumen moved alongside him, providing just enough support to ensure success without inhibiting independence. What would that mean for Briar? He asked. It would mean quarterly visits to Boston for evaluations, at least initially, the doctor replied. But more importantly, it would mean that what you and Lumen have discovered together could potentially help hundreds, maybe thousands of other children. Corbin felt a lump form in his throat. He'd like that, he said softly. Briar, I mean. He's always asking how we can help other kids find their own Lumen. As the sun began to set, casting long golden rays across the backyard, Lena called everyone to gather around the picnic table. Briar was seated in a place of honor, Lumen as always at his side, both wearing matching blue bandanas for the occasion. 2 years ago, Lena began, her voice clear in the quiet yard, our house was a place of darkness. We were a family living in shadows, with little hope for the future. She looked at Corbin, who nodded encouragingly. Then Corbin made what seemed like a crazy decision, to bring home a puppy for a child who could barely move, barely respond to the world around him. She knelt down, placing one hand on Lumen's head, the other on Briar's shoulder. What we didn't know was that he wasn't just bringing home a pet. He was bringing home a light that would change everything. Lumen, Briar said clearly, wrapping his arm around the dog's neck. My light. Yes, Lena agreed, smiling through tears. Your light, and ours too. As glasses were raised in a toast to boy and dog, to journeys of healing and unexpected miracles, Briar leaned close to Lumen, whispering something in the golden ear. The dog turned his head, touching his nose gently to the boy's cheek in a gesture of such tenderness that several guests visibly teared up. Later, as twilight deepened and guests began to depart, Corbin found Lena standing at the edge of the yard, watching as Briar and Lumen played a gentle game of fetch, the boy throwing a soft ball a short distance, the dog retrieving it and placing it carefully in his small hands. What do you think he whispers to Lumen? Corbin asked, sliding an arm around his wife's waist. Lena leaned against him, a peaceful smile on her face. I asked him once. Know what he said? What? He said he tells Lumen thank you, over and over, for finding him when he was lost in the dark. Corbin swallowed hard, watching the beautiful synchronicity between his son and the golden dog who had transformed their lives. Pretty wise kid we've got there. He had a good teacher, Lena replied, nodding toward Lumen, who was now lying patiently while Briar practiced his letters by tracing them on the dog's side. As darkness fell, they called Briar in for bed. The nightly routine was well established now. Bath time, story time, then Lumen's special time. 10 minutes when the dog and boy were left alone together, sharing secrets and solidifying the bond that had changed everything. When Lena and Corbin entered the bedroom to say final goodnights, they found Briar already under the covers, his arm draped over Lumen, who lay on the bed beside him. The one rule that had been bent over time. Lumen was now allowed on Briar's bed every night. "Guess what, Mummy?" Briar said sleepily as Lena bent to kiss his forehead. "What, sweetheart?" "I'm going to walk to school by myself when I'm bigger." Lena and Corbin exchanged glances, caught between not wanting to dampen his enthusiasm and not wanting to set him up for disappointment. "That's a big goal," Corbin said carefully. Briar nodded solemnly. "I know, but Lumen says I can do it." "Does he now?" Lena asked, stroking the golden fur. "Yep. He says I just have to keep trying and never be scared. And remember that even when it's dark, there's always light coming." Lena felt tears prick her eyes at the simple wisdom in her son's words. "Lumen is very smart," she said softly. "The smartest," Briar agreed, his eyes already drifting closed. "He found me when I was lost, and now I'm found forever." As they turned out the light and quietly left the room, Lumen raised his head, his brown eyes reflecting the moonlight streaming through the window. He watched them go, then settled his head protectively next to Briar's, a golden guardian keeping his silent vigil. In the hallway, Lena turned to Corbin, her eyes shining with tears and something else, a peace that had been hard-won through struggle and fear, and ultimately, hope. "You know what?" she whispered. "I think he might actually do it, walk to school someday." Corbin pulled her close, his own eyes damp. With Lumen by his side, I wouldn't bet against it. They stood there for a moment in the quiet hallway, listening to the soft sounds of their son's breathing and the occasional gentle shifting of the dog who had brought light back into their darkness. The future was still uncertain, still filled with challenges they couldn't foresee, but no longer terrifying, because now they knew. Even in the darkest night, there was always the possibility of dawn, always the chance for a golden light to find its way home. My friends, we have reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.